Welcome to the Educational Diagnostician Professional Learning Cohort, which is new to Indiana, new to the Indiana IEP Resource Center, but definitely needed. We've got a lot of really good people out working in the field without a lot of consistency or guidance, and not a lot of professional learning opportunities created specifically for educational diagnosticians. So we have quite a few different topics that we're going to cover in this series. Some of you may have already participated in some of these trainings, but welcome to the cohort. We've got some particular reasons why we created this series. One was because the Indiana Department of Education has been getting quite a few requests from directors, from practitioners out in the field, asking if there are opportunities. What kind of learning opportunities are out there? And there really wasn't any answer. We've also gotten a lot of requests and inquiries at the IEP Resource Center. Another specific reason is because of the current pandemic. We're all kind of in a situation where we're trying to figure out what to do. How can we support students? How can we support our own professional learning and make sure that we use the time that we have? We do have a different allocation of time right now. We don't necessarily have more time, but we have different ways that we can spend our time. And right now is a perfect opportunity for people to increase their learning, participate in some online training, and really grow our profession. There's also definitely that lack of training and resources specifically for educational diagnosticians out there. And then finally, we really just want to make sure that we're operating within the law, that we're using best practices, and we are serving the students that need us in whatever ways we can. So that's why we created the learning cohort. This cohort will definitely be something that is ongoing throughout the year and hopefully in the coming years. We'll be adding additional training opportunities throughout the year as well. And the first series of webinars that we did, we gathered quite a bit of information from the participants about what else. We know what we've planned, but what else is needed out there. So our agenda for this session, it's going to be a little bit shorter session. I want to talk first about who exactly are the educational diagnosticians out there? What kind of qualifications do they have? What different job descriptions are out there? And then talk more about what's going to be offered during this series and what other learning needs are out there. So the qualifications, the answer in Indiana is there are no specific qualifications. There's no reference to an educational diagnostician in Article 7. There's no licensure. There's no certification program currently. But we do have people operating in that role. We have some really great diagnosticians around the state doing a lot of different things. A lot of different kinds of testing and serving in the role of teacher or consultant or interventionist. A lot of different opportunities that are out there, but they're not tied to any specific situation because of that lack of licensure, certification, guidance. What we do know is we have at least one university that is currently in development of creating a certification program. So that may change over time, and we'll kind of keep everybody updated as that unfolds at Indiana State University. The most common situation that we found, and when we polled our first group of cohort attendees, is that most people who are serving in that role come from a special education background with a master's degree. Now again, that's the most common situation. That's not necessarily That's not the rule, and that's certainly not universal. We have some people with a bachelor's degree out there working in this role and doing a fantastic job. We have people coming from a general education background, people coming from more of a speech and hearing background, lots of different kinds of experiences that have led them into this role of wanting to work with students and wanting to provide that expertise out there that they've accumulated over the years. So as far as job descriptions, there are some corporations or special ed cooperatives around the state that do have job descriptions, but they're not necessarily consistent. So when we asked our first cohort, what kinds of things do you do? The most common things come out as doing academic testing. That's probably the most common role, as being part of a multidisciplinary team and completing academic testing. And that makes so much sense, because since most of our diagnosticians around the state are coming from an educator background, they have really specific experience about teaching in the classroom. And when you have taught in a classroom, you can make recommendations based on a student's performance on an academic assessment that tend to be very concrete and realistic to happen in the classroom. I come from a school psychology background, and for me to make recommendations, I try to put that lens on of how is this going to work for a teacher in the classroom? How is this going to work in an educational kind of setting? And sometimes it doesn't translate well. So I think a lot of our teachers can make that connection because they've walked the walk. They have been there, and they know that there are some recommendations that may not be realistic. You know, I'm sure somebody has read some of my recommendations in reports in the past and thought, yeah, right, that's not going to happen. That's not going to be feasible. And I certainly understand that. So I think having diagnosticians who have that educational background is really invaluable when you're talking about a multidisciplinary team and having someone that can make that connection. Probably the second most common thing would be for diagnosticians to complete different kinds of classroom observations, to really get a sense of what the student looks like within that educational setting, looking at behaviors, looking at academic performance in that educational setting. Lots of good information that can come from that role. And then I've also worked with a lot of educational diagnosticians or consultants who have also served in that teacher of record role, either within some of the different schools, having a very specific licensure sometimes to help support students with orthopedic impairment or blind low vision eligibility or deaf hard of hearing eligibility, also serving as a teacher of record in our private or parochial schools that the public schools will also serve. So lots of different things that can be done. We've had some discussion about some other potential opportunities as well and branching out. Some of the things that we could do in that role would be to help assist with speech language pathologists who tend to have a very high caseload and have a lot of students that may need some additional support. Now, I want to provide a little caveat there, because my understanding is that speech language pathology associates or assistants are not allowed to do any language testing. Now, we know that a lot of our achievement tests, though, have some language testing as part of that. We don't always give those subtests, but we can give subtests related to oral expression or listening comprehension. And a lot of diagnosticians are giving those kinds of assessments. So I want to caution you to not expand your role into something that might get your SLPs in hot water. If our SLP associates and assistants are not allowed to be part of certain evaluation processes, then we definitely don't want to step into a role where we might not be welcome, I guess. But there are things that can help kind of cue us into, is a full SLP speech or language evaluation warranted? And sometimes giving some testing within that academic battery or looking at expressive or receptive vocabulary can then lead us to having enough data to say, now we need them to step in. And this helps eliminate a lot of our unnecessary testing. I think our SLPs sometimes get tacked on to an evaluation to say, well, let's just test them in this area just in case they might be eligible. And that's really not how we should be operating. So having some assessment as part of the multidisciplinary team to help rule out that there might be issues there if we're concerned, rather than automatically jumping in and saying, oh, we need a full-blown evaluation in this area. Some other possibilities, and I heard from other diagnosticians that some people are already currently in this role, but that would be assisting with some of the rating scales, whether it's adaptive behavior ratings, helping to gather some information through behavior ratings. Those kinds of things can be really important as well. There's sometimes just an abundance of rating scales. Whether it's sitting down with someone to help them complete this, tracking them down, which can be more time consuming, is trying to get all those rating scales back from parents and teachers and making sure students can complete things if they're of an age that they can do that. But helping with those rating scales can be really important too. Another possibility would be involving our diagnosticians in some brief experimental analysis. Having them be part of, a lot of our diagnosticians are already part of the intervention process, helping out in schools, helping to design some interventions, being part of those problem-solving teams, and those are really great roles as well. But it's also very important as we complete an evaluation to have some concrete ideas about what next. So our evaluations, part of the purpose is to determine eligibility. But another huge piece is the now what. So yes, a student is eligible, or even if they aren't eligible, but now what data do we have that says what might be likely to be effective in helping to support the student? And doing some brief experimental analysis where we try different potential options and gather some data to see what looks like it's working so that we have those good recommendations. A team should be able to take the multidisciplinary team report and now do something with it, not just read it if we're lucky, not just file it away, not just say yes or no to eligibility, but to say, tell me what to do. Tell me what is likely to be effective in supporting the student. Another potential role is representing the multidisciplinary team at case conferences. Now, the language in Article 7 says that when we've done an evaluation, or when we've done an initial evaluation, then a member of the multidisciplinary team needs to be present at a case conference. And that role is so that you can really explain, what happened during the evaluation, what do the results mean, and now let's think about some planning. It doesn't say that it has to be the school psychologist. And I think most of the time we want to be, I say we meaning school psychologists, we want to be part of those meetings. We want to be there for explaining things. But we also know that when and if we come back to school, things are going to be different, and we're going to have just a backlog of meetings to sit in on, cases to complete, and we may need to really rally the troops to make sure that we cover all of these different roles, but we may need to let go of some of that control. I do want to make sure that you always know, no matter what you're hearing from me, that you still need to abide by any in-district or in-co-op guidance that you have. So there may be procedures that are still very legal, that may be a little tighter than what the law says. And if that is what your director or coordinator or whoever you report to is advising, then you need to stick with that guidance. So I'm going to kind of focus on what the law says, and then we'll go from there. There may be some potential in the future too to think about being in a role of assisting with some of the teleassessment. Now, right now, most of your districts that are out there, even within the current crisis, are not doing a lot of teleassessment unless they already were. So if your school was already using maybe an SLP or an OT or a school psychologist that was contracted and completing evaluations by teleassessment, then hopefully they've had the training to be able to do that. But right now, our opportunities for doing any sort of teleassessment would mean that the adult assisting the student on the other end would likely be the parent or an older sibling, which really changes the content of what we get. It changes the results, it changes the dynamics of the assessment. And I think most education professionals around the state right now are saying, you know what, I wasn't doing this before, I'm not ready for it, and I don't think that I ought to just pick this up right now. But we're planning for the future as well. And we know that this situation that's happening now may not be an isolated situation. It may be an ongoing, recurring kind of pandemic. And if so, we need to get ourselves ready to be able to operate under these kind of conditions, because we can't hold off on assessing students forever. Then we have to get back to kind of a new normal. So there may be roles that educational diagnosticians can help out as part of doing some of those remote assessments, but we'll have to think about what that's going to look like and in what capacity that different team members can be part of that. So some of the important issues that kind of led to thinking about this cohort as well is we do have a shortage around the state in schools of speech-language pathologists, school psychologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists, and special ed teachers in general. Yes, our programs are graduating new students. We're getting people out into the field, but then we're also having lots and lots of people hitting that retirement age. Most districts around the state are not operating within the recommended ratios of students to practitioner in most cases. And that's within those areas that actually have a recommendation from their kind of parent national organizations. But it's usually not because a school district is not wanting to hire those people, it's because there aren't enough people to hire. So we're all kind of operating in that situation where we've got high caseloads. We have other roles that we might want to take on within our job, but we can't because we've got other things to do. We've got evaluations, we've got timelines. Right now we all probably have cases that are on hold because we can't sit down with the kids. We can't sit down with the teachers. We can't do classroom observations. So we have that backlog of evaluations, but at the same time, we still have parent referrals coming in. There is nothing right now that stops a parent or even a school from making a request for an evaluation, which means that not only do we have this mass of kids that still need to be evaluated in order to satisfy those child find obligations, but we're adding to it. So the pot's getting bigger and bigger. And so when we are able to test kids, it is going to be all hands on deck. We need to figure out how can we quickly and effectively move through these evaluations and not lead to bad conclusions, not lead to missing kids that truly have a disability, but also not identifying students for special education that don't have a disability. They've just had, interesting circumstances recently. So we also are kind of looking forward to what might be happening in the fall. And I think a lot of people believe that we could have quite a few more evaluations coming in just because kids are going to be struggling. And we know they're going to be struggling. And I think there's going to have to be some really good support at that general education level from all of us to say, all kids are coming back behind. How can we support all kids? And then how can we really identify which kids have disabilities versus which kids are struggling because of the current situation? So in this series, this is what we have for you so far. Now, certainly we're going to be adding to this. We had a lot of really good ideas come out in the first couple of webinars that we did. But here's how this rolls out for the next couple of weeks at least. First, we'll talk about test user qualifications. So the different qualification levels, background levels, training levels that are required by the test companies in order for us to get our hands on and use different kinds of tests. So we'll talk about that in the next webinar. And then we will discuss different concepts that are relevant to educational evaluations, such as confidentiality, standardized procedures, just a lot of things that we need to think about as being part of that educational evaluation process. One specifically on standardized assessment procedures. We'll look at how do you choose different tools? What do you need to be thinking about when you identify your base tools or when you need to go deeper and look at a next level or a diagnostic kind of test? Then we'll discuss the different types of observations that are required as part of the multidisciplinary team evaluations, depending on the disability area that you're looking at, and how can we be a part of those, and which ones can we be a part of. So we'll differentiate between the different kinds and talk about some ways that you can complete, especially those systematic observations that we kind of struggle with how to really get them to be a systematic observation. We'll look at understanding different kinds of test scores. And I think, we probably feel like we've got a pretty good handle on knowing what different test scores mean. How to read them in different ways, but maybe we don't always have the best explanation for parents and our other teachers to let them know what the differences are and which of these do we really need to have in our reports. What just muddies up the water versus what is really giving us good information to share with others. We'll talk about effective report writing because I know most of you are out there writing up at least part of the student's educational evaluation report. So how can we really make those as simple but as effective as possible? We want to make sure that we have useful evaluation reports. And then finally, we'll look at your role when you are attending a case conference committee and being there as a representative of the multidisciplinary team. We'll look at what that looks like, what do you need to really be aware of. And then finally, it's not on this series so far, but we've had a lot of requests for things like how to really understand behavior ratings, how to do a good functional behavioral assessment, working with students in evaluations when they are also identified as English learners, working with students with blind or low vision, working with students with deaf and hard of hearing identification. There are a lot of different things that we may do some different workshops on in order to keep building that skill set. We've also talked about, as new tests come out and we practice giving these tests and scoring, which we know scoring can be really problematic sometimes, we talked about doing some times that people can get together and do that and practice that and bounce ideas off of each other. So we'll have some work days coming up in the fall that will be free to sign up and attend, either in person or in a remote way, to be part of that work group and really work through those issues with your colleagues. So I'm looking forward to those kinds of things as well. We plan on having some virtual office hours kind of for the same thing too, to help troubleshoot those different either test questions or how to work with the online report system so that you can get reports in through IIEP. We'll have a lot of different kinds of things, and that may morph over the year as we find that certain things work better, especially given that we're all working all day long as well. So we're going to have to do some time shifting and offer these kind of opportunities in different formats. Well, thank you for being part of this first installment of the series, and hopefully you will get some benefit out of some of the other topics as we explore those as well.